The 1980s turned Star Wars fever into a full-blown cultural phenomenon where every studio with a camera and a spaceship model decided they needed their own galaxy far, far away, resulting in some of the most gloriously ambitious, hilariously misguided, and surprisingly beloved sci-fi knockoffs ever committed to film. Spaceballs let Mel Brooks loose on the Star Wars universe, with Rick Moranis wearing a helmet so massive he could barely see, delivering one of the great comedic performances of 1980s cinema, while the entire production became this glorious exercise in controlled chaos. Brooks plays Lone Star, a down-on-his-luck pilot who teams up with his half-dog companion Barf to rescue Princess Vespa from the villainous Dark Helmet and President Scroob, all while learning the mystical power of the Schwartz in a galaxy where fourth-wall breaks happen more often than lightsaber duels. Rick actively collaborated with Brooks on shaping Dark Helmet's fidgety, juvenile energy, contributing improvisational brilliance when written jokes didn't land, and using the physically uncomfortable helmet as a springboard for the character's neurotic personality. The crew would sometimes have to reshoot scenes because John Candy kept breaking character in response to Rick's deadpan delivery, with Candy himself enduring 3-hour makeup sessions daily to become Barf while wearing an elaborate costume that left him drenched in sweat by lunch. George Lucas actually loved the script and offered Industrial Light and Magic's effects expertise on one strict condition. Brooks could spoof anything as long as there was no merchandising of Spaceballs toys that might confuse consumers, and Brooks honored Lucas's request while working the merchandise restriction directly into the film as a tribute to their deal. Brooks worked a fake merchandise running joke directly into the movie's plot, with yogurts, coloring books, and t-shirts, though some international markets briefly considered blocking the film as too American or disrespectful to established films. The production became legendary for Moranis, describing it as one of his most joyful filmmaking experiences, despite the physically demanding costume and hours spent playing such an over-the-top villain, with his creative freedom and Brooks's trust resulting in some of the film's most memorable and enduring comedic moments that still hold up decades later. The Last Starfighter pulled off the impossible by making a trailer park kid from nowhere into humanity's last hope, but nobody warned Lance Guest that he'd be performing to thin air for weeks while pretending spaceships existed around him. Guest plays Alex Rogan, a teenager stuck fixing appliances in rural America until he breaks the high score on an arcade machine that turns out to be an alien recruitment test, whisking him off-planet to defend the galaxy against the Kodan Armada alongside his reptilian navigator Grig, in battles where death is permanent and Earth's fate hangs in the balance. Guest's casting was a breakthrough, but production life became unexpectedly isolating as the film demanded he act alone on blue screen sets for days on end, later describing the experience as performing to thin air, which heightened his nerves and left him uncertain whether his character would come across as believable. The overnight celebrity status made him a curiosity among small-town locals, where Earth scenes were filmed, with Guest recalling being both welcomed and slightly resented while dealing with complicated feelings of pride and pressure that colored his performance. The actor who played Grig stayed in full prosthetics to rehearse lines between takes, offering practical jokes and friendship that pulled Guest through tough days and added palpable vulnerability to Alex that turned his first leading role into both a dream and a trial. The film pioneered computer-generated space battle effects, but technical limitations haunted its legacy, with some CGI effects and shots left unfinished or lost due to technological problems at digital productions that animators and historians have described in interviews over the years. Robert Preston's charismatic Centauri marked one of his final major roles before retirement and declining health, with cast and crew revealing he poured trademark charm into the character, even as he struggled with fatigue from long shooting days. Preston reportedly approached his last day on set with nostalgia and bid a long, heartfelt farewell to the cast, thanking them for a final adventure, receiving a commemorative Star League plaque at a private wrap dinner that made his warm magnetic presence give the movie a depth and dignity, setting it apart from typical sci-fi fare. Battle Beyond the Stars launched James Cameron's career and proved Roger Corman could squeeze a space opera out of pocket change, but Richard Thomas had no idea he'd be acting opposite blinking lights and puppets while trying to save a planet with the galaxy's strangest band of mercenaries. Thomas plays Shad, a young farmer sent on a desperate quest to recruit help after the tyrannical warlord Sidor threatens to annihilate peaceful planet Akir with his stellar converter weapon, assembling a ragtag crew including a Valkyrie warrior, a haunted assassin, and a hive mind entity driven by boredom who join for motives ranging from revenge to simple survival. Thomas was known for his iconic role on the Waltons and found the jump into sci-fi both liberating and bewildering, coming from down-to-earth drama to suddenly piloting a talking spaceship in Roger Corman's rushed low-budget environment that lacked Hollywood polish. Filming in cramped sound stages with rapid shooting schedules meant Thomas was often the only human on set, spending long days acting opposite voiceover cues and puppeteered characters, while improvising through technical difficulties that demanded total imagination and stamina. Thomas approached Shad's journey with earnestness and worked to foster camaraderie among cast members during downtime, later saying the DIY spirit pushed him out of his comfort zone and let him discover a new field of acting vastly different from his previous roles. Sybil Danning's portrayal of Saint X-Men became legendary when she refused to be typecast as mere eye candy, performing many of her own stunts and insisting on choreographing battle sequences while confronting on-set sexism and the casual dismissal of her creative input. Danning successfully lobbied for Saint X-Men to receive a memorable heroic arc and worked closely with costume designers, even challenging the studio to make practical changes to her Valkyrie armor so she could fight comfortably despite producers expecting her to play a background role. James Cameron served as art director and head of special effects after the original director was fired, using found objects like spray-painted egg cartons and milk crates to build believable futuristic interiors, while reportedly going days without sleep, obsessively working to make the film's visuals as impressive as possible. Cameron's attention to detail and work ethic became legendary, with Roger Corman himself crediting his ingenuity with elevating the movie's aesthetic beyond typical B-movie fare, ensuring ships were visually distinct and scenes were framed to hide limitations of small sound stages in ways that launched his remarkable career. Krull flew everything at the screen, including a magical throwing star, a shape-shifting sidekick, and a teleporting fortress, but nobody prepared Lysette Anthony for the heartbreak of having her entire voice replaced without warning. Anthony plays Princess Lissa, kidnapped on her wedding night by the terrifying beast who invades planet Krull with his black fortress, forcing Prince Colwyn to embark on a quest through mountains and deadly swamps, gathering a ragtag fellowship to rescue her using the legendary glaive weapon. This was supposed to be Krull's epic love story, where the hero crosses an entire planet to save his bride, and Anthony was literally the face of that romance on every poster and promotional material. Anthony was only 19 during her first major motion picture and felt isolated on set, shooting most scenes surrounded by older men in remote English locations with harsh weather and elaborate costumes. The sharper blow came in post-production when producers judged her natural speaking voice as too refined and not regal enough, dubbing her entire spoken performance with American actress Lindsay Krause in a detail the studio hid for years. Anthony later spoke in interviews about feeling erased from her own breakout role with her face and movement on screen, but none of her voice, describing the heartbreak as profound while the press focused on lavish sets and effects. Ken Marshall, playing Colwyn, faced his own physical ordeal, performing his own stunts, including horseback riding and fighting slayers across wild stretches of England, sometimes battling hypothermia during shoots. A miscalculated rehearsal with a burning rope resulted in Marshall suffering facial burns that were masked by clever makeup and camera angles, with the strain compounded by pressure of leading a massive effects-heavy production as a relative unknown. The British Board of Film Classification considered the dark fantasy content, but approved the film for a PG rating after minor edits. Though over time, the blend of romance and horror, once cause for concern, became a cherished element for a generation drawn to fantasy's darker edges. Spacehunter Adventures in the Forbidden Zone gave Molly Ringwald her first taste of stardom by throwing a 15-year-old into a toxic wasteland with mutants and making her perform stunts that left her bruised and questioning every career choice. Ringwald plays Nikki, a streetwise orphan who teams up with rugged bounty hunter Wolf to rescue three stranded Earth women from the half-machine tyrant Overdog, who rules the Forbidden Zone through acid lakes, scavenger gangs, and deadly gladiatorial games in this post-apocalyptic space western hybrid. The studio was betting big that Ringwald's scrappy underdog energy would carry this Mad Max meets Star Wars mashup, and they worked her like an adult stunt performer to make it happen. Ringwald landed the role after a grueling audition where she competed against older, more experienced actresses despite having no experience with stunt work or sci-fi effects. Director Lamont Johnson insisted on authenticity, so Ringwald performed many of her own stunts and bruised herself repeatedly racing across scorched, jagged landscapes, doubling for alien planets on Calgary oilfield locations that felt genuinely hostile. Ringwald described feeling isolated and overwhelmed among an older cast in an environment vastly different from anything she'd experienced, later crediting the role with toughening her resolve and carving a path for more iconic roles, even though the movie flopped in theaters. Michael Ironside's transformation into Overdog required spending as many as 7 hours daily in special effects makeup, glued into a hulking suit that weighed more than 60 pounds and radiated heat under set lights, sometimes causing him to faint between takes. Reports circulated of clashes with the effects team as Ironside's physical discomfort led to explosive outbursts, at one point threatening to quit if the schedule didn't change, despite his performance giving Overdog a manic energy that turned a potentially monotonous villain into a cult favorite. Fans have speculated about deleted scenes and longer cuts, but no verified extended version has surfaced beyond standard edits made to secure the PG rating, leaving fans seeking proof of the missing footage that adds an air of legend to the film's eccentric afterlife. The black hole proved Disney could build a technological monster to rival industrial light and magic, then promptly fired a legendary sci-fi writer before he finished lunch for making a dirty joke about Mickey Mouse. The film follows the crew of spacecraft Palomino stumbling upon the long-lost vessel Cygnus hovering near a massive black hole, encountering enigmatic Dr. Hans Reinhardt, who claims to have survived years in isolation with only silent humanoid drones, and the menacing robot Maximilian as company while planning to send his ship past the event horizon. Disney was desperate to prove they could compete with Star Wars, and staked their entire sci-fi credibility on pioneering visual effects that would make George Lucas jealous. When they tried to rent George Lucas's legendary motion control camera system, Industrial Light and Magic's price was outrageous. So Disney did something unthinkable for a studio known for fairy tales and built their own system from scratch. The result was Ace's automated camera effects system, a computer-controlled motion camera rig that could repeat precise moves with microscopic accuracy that even ILM's team later admitted was technically more advanced, with Disney also developing the Meteskin rig, allowing cameras to move across matte paintings for the first time. The black hole ended up containing more than 550 visual effect shots, all produced inside the studio without outside contractors, pulling veteran matte painter Peter Ellenshaw out of retirement to oversee work, combining traditional hand-painted backdrops with new camera tech. The film's most haunting image of the swirling cosmic black hole wasn't created with computers or animation, but was actually a whirlpool and a plexiglass tank filled with dyed water, with effects artists filming it from above under polarized lighting while rotating the tank and changing paint flow to create that hypnotic vortex. This handmade optical illusion fooled audiences and scientists alike, with many assuming it was the first example of computer graphics in live-action film. Harlan Ellison, one of science fiction's most acclaimed and volatile writers, was briefly hired as a consultant to bring scientific credibility, but didn't even make it through his first lunch break, after he started pitching what he claimed was a parody idea involving an X-rated animated film starring Disney characters. Ellison riffed loudly about Mickey and Minnie doing things Walt never drew, while unfortunately Roy E. Disney was eating at the next table, leading to Ellison being escorted off the lot and fired on the spot before dessert arrived, in what became one of the most infamous one-meal firings in movie history. Buck Rogers in the 25th century took NASA astronaut Buck Rogers from 1987 and dropped him 5 centuries into the future, where Princess Ardala wanted him. Colonel Wilma Deering suspected him, and Gil Gerard fought everyone about how to play the character while battling his own demons. Gerard plays Buck, who awakens from suspended animation to find Earth scarred by nuclear war, with survivors clustered in domed cities, getting caught in tense political maneuverings as he's suspected of being a draconian spy before uncovering Princess Ardala's scheme to conquer Earth through staged pirate attacks. Universal was banking on Buck becoming their answer to Han Solo with disco swagger and shirtless heroics, but Gerard had completely different ideas about who this character should be. Gerard clashed with producers and directors from the outset over the tone of Buck's character, chafing at what he viewed as childish jokes that undercut the film's serious sci-fi aspirations, and spending hours reworking dialogue in his trailer to reflect his vision of Buck as a complex, haunted hero. These disagreements led to tense days on set, with stories of near walkouts and heated script meetings, while off-camera, Gerard wrestled with sudden fame and its temptations, as the pressure of carrying a multi-million-dollar production contributed to struggles with substance abuse. Erin Gray, playing Colonel Wilma Deering, felt both pressure and pride as one of the first female leads in a sci-fi action role, training with movement coaches to present Wilma with authoritative posture while struggling with limited depth initially given to her character. Gray bristled when scripts repeatedly relegated Wilma to the sidelines, while Buck stole the action, lobbying writers to expand her role as an independent force rather than just Buck's ally, in ways that created tensions with male co-stars and producers who felt threatened by how fans responded to Wilma's growing prominence. The film walked a delicate line between adult-oriented spectacle and PG-friendly fun, with Buck's shirtless dancing and Princess Ardala's sex symbol wardrobe drawing sharp reactions from parents and reviewers afraid it might be too suggestive for young audiences. Broadcast cuts on television and cable syndication trimmed suggestive dialogue and flashes of skin, including parts of the notorious disco dance scene between Buck and Ardala, with international versions in conservative markets further blurring or cutting scenes deemed too risque. Enemy Mine, threw Dennis Quaid and Louis Gossett Jr. onto a volcanic hellscape where a human pilot and alien warrior had to choose between killing each other or surviving together. But the real battle was happening behind the cameras, where directors were getting fired and budgets were exploding into financial catastrophe. Quaid plays Willis Davidge, a brash human pilot who crash lands on the desolate planet Ferrin 4 alongside his sworn enemy, a Drak fighter he nicknames Jerry, whose entire species has been at war with humanity for generations. Stranded together on a world of violent storms and treacherous wildlife, they're forced to move from open hostility to wary cooperation, eventually forming a bond so deep that when Jerry dies after giving birth, Davidge raises the orphan Drak child Zamis as his own, in a story that became one of cinema's most moving allegories about overcoming prejudice. Fox was betting this interspecies friendship would resonate as both action spectacle and emotional drama, but they had no idea the production would become one of the 80s most notorious disasters. Director Richard Lon Crane was fired after weeks of struggling with brutal shooting conditions in Iceland and elaborate, costly sets, with the studio so unhappy with the dailies that they shut down the entire production and scrapped all existing footage. Wolfgang Petersen was brought in to replace him, forcing the cast and crew to relocate to Germany, where they reshot the film from scratch, ballooning the budget from $17 million to over $40 million in what became a financial nightmare. Dennis Quaid described the shutdown as deeply demoralizing, fearing the film would never be finished while stuck in production limbo. Louis Gossett Jr. endured 5-hour daily makeup sessions that covered him in suffocating layers of latex and prosthetics, making breathing and eating between takes nearly impossible, while he invented Jerry's rasping guttural voice and reptilian movements. Gossett described the process as claustrophobic and spiritually stretching, but committed fully to exploring Jerry's androgyny and spirituality beneath the makeup and what he later called one of his most challenging roles. The film flopped spectacularly upon release in 1985, earning just $12 million against its inflated budget after test audiences disliked the slow build and emotional focus over non-stop action. Fox's marketing campaign completely downplayed the friendship at the movie's heart, making it look like a generic space battle that gave up on the film before it even had a chance.